I was thinking last week, we're in this series on reform because of the anniversary of the Reformation. I was thinking about whether or not it was a coincidence that the iPhone 10 dropped the same week as the anniversary of the Reformation. And, I think about these things. Consider. The Reformation is sort of this catalytic moment in shifting the technology of the Christian tradition and the Christian religion. And in the same way, the iPhone 10 is sort of like the 95 thesis of the innovation and evolution of mobile cellular device stuff. Apple keeps doing it. This was a review from the first day the iPhone was out, the new one. I love new technology and the wild ideas that come with it. I love to be immersed in new concepts, but I'm also practical. When it comes to tools, my phone is my mission-critical everything. And I love that phrase at the end, the mission-critical everything, because I think what he's saying is that his technology is indispensable. And that sort of got me thinking that whatever we think the technology of religion is, the technology of Christianity, the tradition, the church, I wonder, is it dispensable? Has it become dispensable? And I think in large part the statistics bear that out to basically say, yeah, people are leaving organized religion in droves. Religion is dispensable, particularly Christianity in the West. People are dispensing of it. They're leaving it. They're departing from it. And so whatever that technology is, I wonder on this sort of anniversary of reform, whether or not we're actually reforming technology or if we're just sort of refurbishing antiques. And so if you think about, 50 years ago, if we thought about the phone, what would it have meant to innovate the phone? We would have gone, we're going to put a lot more features on a handheld phone that's anchored to a wall, and maybe we'll get rid of the, what's the thing called? The rotary dial. Like maybe we'll put some buttons on there, and it's like, this is going to be some great innovation with the phone. It'll make really good phone calls. And even 15 years ago, we might have thought, well, what's innovation going to mean with a mobile phone? Well, the razor is going to get really thin. So we'll do some really innovative things with a flip phone, right? And put all sorts of new features that'll make it really great at making phone calls with absolutely no idea that the future of a mobile device was going to be based on the internet and social media and photo and video-based communication and text messaging, right? Not phone calls, but anything but phone calls, right? I'd way rather you text me than call me on the phone. So this is like 15 years ago. We're going, what's innovative? We have no idea. And so I started thinking, it's almost like religion, right? The technology of religion, the church, especially in the West, is perfectly suited for the phone call industry, but we find ourselves in like a Snapchat world, right? We've done a lot of great innovating. The problem is we're not even in the right industry anymore. And so Luther puts the 95 Theses on the door of the church and says, hey, these are the grievances, the way the church is behaving. Not only is it not helping people, this is how it's hurting people. Here's just 95 ways that I can think of. Sojourner says American Christianity has failed. That was one of the readings. Apple, they live with the mantra, the last 95 innovations weren't good enough, so we're just going to keep going because we can make more money. And it's only $1,000 for a phone, so keep buying. In a way, they're all saying the same thing, right? We can do better. We can do better. We're not done evolving. There's more. We haven't finished. There's going to be some additional innovation and evolution. But we look at the church, and the reality is that tech is outdated. So what's the alternative? I think it has to begin with an embrace of innovation itself. And this is a graphic from, I think, 6 weeks ago. We talked about sort of offering this as an alternative narrative to sort of the flat and binary Christian narrative we've been given. This is the cosmic narrative. So we said this is a story of self-transcendence, 13.8 billion year story. This is sort of what we know as we know it. And throughout the course of the story, what we see is an increase in complexity, depth, and unity. And throughout it, something is happening. There's some sort of movement, which is whatever, the force, the spark, God, the Spirit, love. But as it increases, what we see is particles bond with particles and make atoms, which bond and make molecules, which bond and make cells. And at each level, they're sort of expanding, becoming something beyond what they were before, which is fascinating. But it asks some questions. If particles get together and make atoms, which get together and make molecules, which get together and make cells, which get together and make complex life forms, animals, and us, what is it that we make when we get together? Right? If this is how the story has gone, at each level, things bond with other things of similar essence and substance, and they make something that didn't exist at the prior component level, what is it that people make when we bond together? Are we human or are we dancer? It's the only reason I asked for that song, but it was phenomenal, so thank you. And at some level, we see this, like even if you're not really sure what I'm talking about, if you watch a flock of birds that are in flight, you see them sort of pan left, they pan right, and they swoop higher and they swoop lower. If we somehow could stop them and take one at a time every bird out of that flock, we could not pinpoint a bird who was leading the rest of those birds. None of the birds are communicating in any measurable way with one another that they should bank left, they should bank right. What happens is a sort of collective consciousness emerges when they fly together. What's called epiphenomenon or emergence. My favorite example, I love cycling. So when you watch the Tour de France and the peloton, this group of hundreds of riders, comes out of a small French town and they get into the open, they're hit with a crosswind, and you see the peloton of riders go, they separate apart and they come back together. And then they go into another town. And then they come out of the town and they get hit with a 20-mile-an-hour crosswind, and they all go, and they scatter, and they come back together. And they've got their little earbuds in, and their coach is talking to them, and there's a leader of each team, but none of them is telling any of the other riders, we're about to get hit with a crosswind. When we hit with a crosswind, let's all separate by about 2 or 3 feet from each other, and we'll get apart, and then we'll all come. Nobody says anything. It just happens. Emergence, epiphenomenon. What happens when we come together? Something else emerges when people come together. What is it? Now, there's a competing story. And I mentioned this 6 weeks ago also. The competing story is, our God is better, our tribe is better, our way is better. You should come join our tribe, or we're going to kick your ass. That's the other story. And this is a really phenomenal story. And people who tell that story in the pledge drive make lots and lots of money. There's so much money to be made with that story. The interesting thing is, this is a story of dividing and excluding. Right? And most often, this is based on beliefs. If you have a system of beliefs, you can divide people and you can exclude people. The problem is this story, the cosmic story, is a story of transcending and including. Right? It increases, it continues. It increases that way. Sorry, I was doing that. It's going. It increases, right? It expands, it gets bigger, it includes. It doesn't divide, it doesn't exclude. One of the things, I think what Brian's going to talk about on Friday night, that lecture, is going to be about the movement from a system of beliefs to a way of life. And one of the hallmarks of a system of beliefs is that it becomes incredibly tribal, because my beliefs are right and your beliefs are wrong. And if we have a system, then our system is the right system. So what we can do is then divide ourselves from you and exclude you. But a way of life is rooted in transcending and including, especially a way of life that sets, for example, an open table, that practices equality, that practices inclusivity, that seeks justice, that does hospitality. So what is this thing, right? If it keeps building and building, what do we become when we bond, when we connect with each other? For thousands of years, different religions, different philosophies, sorcerers and mystics, sages, gurus, apostles, shaman, they've been taking sort of guesses at what this might be when people bond. And we heard from the reading in our tradition tonight that very quickly they arrive at the image of a body, this universal human body. That's the thing that we make when we bond together. And they believed that there was something holding all of this together, sort of that universal animating spirit they called the cosmic Christ, holding all of it together. So you see this throughout the narrative and throughout the Christian tradition. Paul says, in God we live and move and have our being. This is sort of that universal spirit. Paul Tillich says the depth dimension of this story, he says that's God. The name God is speaking to the ground of all being. And then there's a French Jesuit paleontologist called Pierre Teilhard de Chardin who says progress is the soul of the universe. So whatever language we want to use, they called it the cosmic Christ, soul of the universe. So the next evolution, the thing that we become, is actually language we've been using all along throughout the Christian tradition. It's still the church, the body of Christ, the universal humanity, inclusive of all people. But here's the difference. Just because we've been using the language doesn't mean we've been using the technology. Because what we've been calling church and what we've been calling body of Christ for a couple thousand years has been built on a story of dividing and excluding, has been built on a system of beliefs. But the body of Christ is not about dividing and excluding. It's about transcending and including. It's not about a system of beliefs. It's an invitation into a particular way of life, and that way of life is bonding with our fellow humans. Desjardins goes on. There's plenty to suggest that we're entering a critical new phase of evolution in which some old order survival strategies, read the fight or flight mechanism, that have ruled our survival thus far, are giving way to a new and more intentional sense of mutual interdependence. The transition appears to already be underway. To continue this turning, it's crucial that we humans make the evolutionary shift from individuals to persons. He goes on to clarify what he means. An individual lives in an autonomous unit, subject to the old order laws of survival of the fittest and planetary indifference. A person has come to understand themselves as belonging to a greater relational field. They now sense their identity from a sense of wholeness and an entirely different order of coherence, a whole greater than the sum of its parts. In this greater whole, both unity and differentiation are preserved. That's good news for a congregation like Collective, because we'll probably stay pretty differentiated, but the call is still to be united, to be whole, to be one, to belong, to bond with all people, to set an open table for all people. So not merely to coexist as a bunch of autonomous individuals, but to coalesce, right? What happens when we bond? And it's not passive, right? It's a practice, it's active. So I want us to break down this just as an example, because we're a United Methodist congregation, if you didn't know that. The mission of the Methodist Church is to make disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. I don't know when that was written, but it sounds pretty old. What's the theory, or what's the ideology, or we might say, what's the end game of a statement like this? What's the goal? Well, no, specifically in the statement. So the transformation of the world, right? That's the end. And then what is to make disciples of Jesus Christ? Methodology, right. That's great, because we're Methodists. I get it. Yes, right? We love a method. Yeah, so we might say the transformation of the world is the theory or the ideology, and then making disciples is the technology. That's how it gets done. Now, interestingly, that's fine, but a technology is not an ideology. And for a long time, especially Christianity, has sort of used these things interchangeably. A technology is not an ideology. And so if I were to ask you, is the new iPhone Christian? Like, what do you mean? That doesn't make any sense, right? It can't be, because it's a technology. And yet, we've taken something like making disciples of Jesus Christ, and we've taken this technology and assumed and sort of read over the ideology such that really what we've been doing for a long, long time is making disciples of Jesus Christ for the sake of making disciples of Jesus Christ. It's become the end and the means, and totally lost sight of the transformation of the world. But if we look at the ideology and then back into what technology we need to do that, we pretty quickly realize that that technology is out of date. The technology is not working. And in fact, it's getting worse rather than better. People are leaving becoming disciples for the sake of becoming disciples because there is no transformation happening. And at the same time, people are more excited than ever about the transformation of the world. They're just looking at the church to do it. The technology isn't working. Technology has to flow from ideology, not vice versa. Simon Sinek says organizations usually begin with what and how. That's technology. But people are actually most inspired by why. By ideology, by the theory, by what it is that we're doing, why we're doing it. And so when we ask you to give in the pledge drive, we're actually not asking you to give to how. We're not asking you to give to what, because if you've been around for any time, even if you're like Lisa and Crenshaw, you've been around for a year and a half, things have already changed. The technology of what we're doing and how we're doing it is always evolving. It has to, because we have a keen eye on the why, right? And it's the why that we're looking at the future and saying, this is worth pursuing that why, but it means we have to stay very open to ongoing reform, because this is going to continue to change over and over and over and over. So I shared this story this morning at brunch. I worked my way from sprint triathlons up to Ironman triathlons. I realized it was like 9 years ago that I started doing this stuff, which is crazy. Feeling pretty old. So an Ironman triathlon is a 2.5-mile swim, 112-mile bike, and a 26-mile run. It's a full marathon. And I still sort of have to process in my mind that the first full marathon I ever did was in an Ironman, which was like a 12-hour race, which is kind of crazy. And sort of my thought was, I did Ironman races. For a while, I was a sponsored athlete. I had a professional coach. I got certified to coach athletes. I coached other athletes. I started a club at Stetson to coach the triathlon team there. With all that experience, just imagine that I say to you tonight, I mean, you guys are some of the most amazing people I've ever met in my life, and so I really believe that you can do this. We're going to get a good night's sleep, and then in the morning, we're all going to go do an Ironman together. Bear with me. I know it doesn't feel like it, but I have some inspiring words for you. I want you to try really hard. I do. I want you to try really hard. I feel like you sort of intuitively go, yeah, no, right? Hard pass, right? And you're really putting the screws to me, so I'm going to go, okay, I've been withholding. Here's the good stuff. I'm going to give you Gatorade. I'm going to give you Cliff Bars. I'm going to give you shot blocks and goo gels and salt tabs and caffeine pills. The very best nutrition that you can have for an all-day endurance event, I'm going to provide. And you'd still probably go, yeah, thanks, but no thanks, right? Because that might help, but you all know intuitively that if what you want to do is swim and bike and run all day, that at some point you've got to train to swim and bike and run. At some point, we have to actually do what we want to do. At some point, we actually have to do what we want to do. And this is interesting because the technology of the Christian religion, I would say for at least the last 500 years, if not more, has predominantly been understood to be try really hard, to be good or to be moral or to be like Jesus, whatever that means, depending on your perspective. Try really hard. And then to help you out, here's some supplements to shore up the system of beliefs. Listen to a bunch of sermons. Learn to read your Bible. Read some really good Christian books. Go to conferences. Listen to podcasts. Consume. Like, here's all of this good Christian nutrition. It's going to be great. But over time, we sort of lost sight of the fact that at some point, we have to actually do what we want to do. Because trying really hard and consuming a bunch of beliefs about things is not the same as actually doing what we want to do. So, what is our training program, right? If we're advocating a sort of reformation, a shift, an innovation, a new technology, I love the phrase Brian McLaren uses, the church is a school of love. And even that, I think, can sort of very quickly be abused because we have such a didactic understanding of school. And so we think of a school of love, and it's like, oh, God, if we could just get the smartest person with a PhD to get up and give lectures about love, then we'd all sort of learn about love. But I think what he's advocating is actually that idea that the body has many parts and every part is necessary, because the arm doesn't want to love the foot, because the foot sucks, right? The foot's an asshole. But we need to learn to love each other. Right? And not through a lecture from a PhD, but in a school where we get to actually practice things like unconditional positive regard, like hospitality, like welcoming people, not just that we don't really like much, but that we hate and we disagree with. What does that look like? What does a school of love built around practicing that look like? Jesus says really radical stuff, like the new command, like who gave him the right to come up with new commands? The new command I give you, love one another as I have loved you. And this is my favorite. I'm giving it away. I'm probably going to preach the same thing at Easter, so just remember this and you'll be good. So post-resurrection Jesus shows up and says to his disciples, whoever you forgive is forgiven. And whoever you don't forgive is not forgiven. I feel like this is giving a toddler a gun. I don't think it's fair for him to give people the authority to forgive people or not forgive people. That seems dangerous. But what I love is that for a long time, Christianity has gone around saying, oh, Jesus' death and resurrection is about forgiving all of our sins. No. According to Jesus, his death and resurrection is about us forgiving each other's sins. That's a very different thing. So loving one another, forgiving sins. And if you want to know what this looks like, I want to share a post from, a lot of us know Dr. Rajni Shankar Brown. She works in the Education and Social Justice program at Stetson. This was on her Facebook the other week. And she's Hindu, and if you want to know what forgiveness and love look like, it's this. To whoever broke into my car last night, I hope the $20 and butterfly pattern coin purse, ironically embroidered with the words live honestly, spread joy, brimful of change, are helpful and used towards good. I hope the variety of snacks, items our family purchased to share with homeless families nourish you and that you share with others, especially with individuals experiencing hunger. I hope you enjoy my 70s retro sunglasses, a gift that I've certainly enjoyed, an extra snug fit that finally relax and fit flawlessly. I sincerely hope it brings you as much joy and protection from strong UV rays on sunny Florida days. Most of all, I hope you return my friend Savannah Jane's laptop because it's the right thing to do. And if you choose not to return it, at least connect it to Wi-Fi so she can trace it and retrieve it. To whoever broke into my car last night and broke into our neighbors' cars as well, I hope you have brighter days and direct you to different paths. Because this path, as my little one put it, it's not nice, not cool, and sad. People are already hungry and thirsty for opportunities to learn love and to practice love and to participate in communities that are offering safe places to serve as schools of love. When we talk about spirituality and spiritual direction, we're not primarily anymore looking for sort of the antiquated idea that somebody stands up and says, I finally have the key to unlock the secret in the Bible or the sacred text, because God has hidden our happiness in a riddle, and we need someone to stand up and sort of give the key. I don't think that's it, right? I don't think you're going to come in one night and hear a sermon and go, finally, right? Years I've been putting into this, and I finally heard like the one thing that I needed to hear, and now it all makes sense, and I'm a good person. I think we keep getting together because we know that we can't get this, right? We can't ever really get this, but our best hope is to keep practicing it together, to keep holding that out in front of us, and to stay open to whatever it means to pursue the next version of what is best served to get us there. We set an open table. We do things like remember. We practice mercy. We need more and more to learn to practice justice. And again, if you need to know what that looks like, you need to talk to Freddie, the work that he's doing. Not just feeding people who are hungry, but holding the powers that be accountable for injustice. That's the work of justice. Unconditional hospitality. There's a lot of stuff that sounds easy, right? And the easiest thing to do is take that language and put it in a system of beliefs and go, well, let's just get together every week and let's celebrate that we all believe in those words, right? And we do. We all believe those are good things. Let's love each other. Let's be hospitable. Let's set an open table. Let's forgive each other. That's all well and good, but at some point, believing that is not enough. Trying really hard is not enough. Consuming more literature about being that kind of person is not enough. We have to actually do what we want to do, right? We need to explore what it means to live those kind of lives in the laboratory of a school of love. So what do we want to do? I don't know. But we're going to keep coming back every week, and we'll figure it out, I think, maybe at some point. One of my favorite, this is one of both my favorite and most humorous visions of the Eucharist, is the disciples reserving a table for 26 so that they can get all 13 on one side for the portrait of the Last Supper. It's the only thing that makes sense to me. But so I think of that a lot, but the other thing that it does for me is picturing them all sitting on one side of the table. It reminds me, and I had this image years ago, and I've not been able to shake it, that the table of the Eucharist is a double-sided table, meaning that we can never only come to it. It always sends us back out. We can never only receive from it. It always turns us back towards the world in love. and in service and to give the gift that we've received. And so whatever it is that we receive at this table, and there's lots of different language for that, right? Grace, the real presence of Christ, the gift of God, serenity, whatever it is that we receive at this table, we then turn back towards the world in love. And the best way I've ever heard this put, and it's not just about the Eucharist, I think it's every good thing that we get from our practice of faith and spirituality. It only ever comes to us on its way to others. Right? I think that's at the core of what it means for us to pursue bonding with our fellow human beings. Not just existing as autonomous individuals, but coalescing, becoming one, becoming this universal human body, is that whatever grace comes to us, however it comes to us, it only ever comes to us on its way to others. It's always flowing through us, and it's always got others in mind. We can't be greedy with grace. It doesn't ever rest with us. It's never done with us. We receive it so that we can return it, so that we can come together. And for us in our tradition, the image is one where we offer ourselves to be broken open and poured out for the healing of the world. We offer ourselves to be bound with others, to trust in whatever comes next, whatever that next level of emergence, that next level of self-transcendence. We come together, and I think that's where faith is. We don't know what that's going to be. We're not sure what we could be if we actually came together. But we believe that it's better than we are as individuals, disconnected individuals, divided individuals, excluded individuals, that if we can come together, there is a better world, there's a better humanity, there's a universal human body. And it's the hope of that we set at this table tonight. It's set for us, but as always is open to all people. And no one will ever be turned away. When you're ready, feel free to come and grab a piece of bread and dip it in the cup.